Hello and welcome to the Fireplace Podcast. This is episode 25. Our disclaimer, we are amateur investors, some more amateur than others. This content is intended to be us learning together rather than regulated financial advice. We urge you to check the ideas that you find here with other sources. Today, Mike and I are joined by our friend John, and we're going to do a question and answer special. The idea being we've polled members of our Facebook group asking what questions do you want us to answer. We've collated 14 of those, and we're going to try and tackle them quite quickly. I think we're not going to go in great depth to these. Morning, guys. How are you both doing?
Very well, thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Very good, thanks.
Yep. Right, Mike. What's first up then? What's the first question?
Right. Okay. Well, the first question was one actually asked by John, but it's a good one.
Cheating.
It is cheating a bit, but it's a good one to discuss, and it got some answers in our group. And the question is, what efficiency trade-offs do you have to make to retire early? And that's quite a big one. And I like the idea, John. What sort of things were you thinking of?
I think the main one, of course, is if you're retiring before pension access age, before age 57-ish now, then obviously you need some money outside your pension. And most firefolk will try and max the pension advantage as much as they possibly can. So obviously, if you are having to save outside pension in ISA, or even worse in a taxable account because you can't save enough in your ISA, then obviously you're giving up that lovely tax relief, which is a net gain when you come to withdraw it. So that's the main one, I think. But there's probably others about what you think.
It's quite a psychological hump to get over to forego some of that free money from the pension. But I am conscious that most people that find us are doing so a bit later in life when maybe they're more established. In my own case, I sold a holiday home, and you end up with a lump of capital which you haven't got the pension allowance to get into pension. So by nature, I think a lot of people have money in ISAs anyway.
Yeah, I think we come to the point where I think a lot of people come later, like you say, and they haven't fully understood pensions, and therefore they've got a lot of money outside pensions, and they've got that problem anyway. But if you were deliberately going at it, then yes, you've foregone at least some advantage of doing the pension.
Yeah, one thing we've covered, I think, on our interviews with people also is that there's a difficult decision to make because quite often people put a lot in their pensions and then realize when they get close to retirement age, oh, the pension's grown very fast. Oh, I could actually retire now. Well, hang on a minute. No, I can't because I didn't put anything in my ISA, or I didn't put enough in my ISA. So there's a temptation to put everything in the pension until the last minute. But often, if the pension does well, you're forced to keep working because you haven't got anything else to live on. So I think my recommendation is always to put a little bit in your ISA as you get sort of within 10 years of your retirement age, just in case the pension does really well and you can go a bit earlier than you thought.
Yeah, I think I would always want to keep at least a couple of years in your ISA anyway, a couple of years of expenses just as a buffer in case, life happens and you need that money for some reason.
And also, I think there's a case for saying that having all your eggs in one basket is never a good idea. And your pension company might have a web outage on the month you want to retire, or something else might go wrong. So it's always a good idea to have a bit of money somewhere else.
I can see the advantage of beefing up your pension a bit more than the ISA, because if the ISA were to let you down, if you were to have a bit of a bridge failure or things go a bit wrong, that's going to happen quite early in life when you could you have options, don't you? You can do a bit more work.
Yes, no, I think that's a good point. I think when you're younger, the other sources of income, i.e. going back to work, are much easier to get to, whereas if you're older, it's not so easy.
Yeah, it's not an ideal situation, but it's a lot better than hitting 75 and deciding that you're broke.
Yeah. I think the next question we had, which is also from John, is on a similar topic, which is how important is it to understand the tax system for those on the path to fire? And it's something we talk about quite a lot.
Yeah, can I have a go at this one?
Yeah, sure.
I think there's two stages to this. At the basic level, if you understand using up your personal allowance, that's the big win, and that most people probably don't need to worry about going much beyond that in retirement, if you draw tax-free your 12.5 grand from a pension each year, that's a great start, and you've maximized a lot of the benefit. Everything beyond that is kind of higher level, isn't it, and optimizing.
I think before that you have to remember that the big one is the pension contributions are the big tax advantage, which kind of, I think you kind of assumed in your answer, Andy. But once you've got the tax advantage from the pension contributions, then the next big one, as you say, is to always make sure you utilize your personal allowance. And I think people get confused by this, because when you're utilizing the personal allowance from a pension, the money is coming from the taxable side of the pension.
In a tax-free way.
In a tax-free way, yeah. Okay, John.
I think I was more about the accumulation side here. Is that obviously if you're using pension over ISA, that's usually knocking at least a year off your FIRE journey. You get the same amount of money for less earnings, as it were, in retirement.
Yeah, which kind of goes back to the first question, that you've got to, at some point, you've got to have a guess at how much you want to split your pension and ISA, and it's a slightly sort of round and round decision, because as you get closer to retirement age, you have a better idea of it, and that split, you sort of refine it as you go, I guess.
This is really what I was hoping to tackle when I built Fire Planner, because it was to just give people an idea of trajectory and a rough split between ISA and SIP, and not be working blind. But I think you could go very deeply into trying to analyze and plan, and the market doesn't cooperate and life doesn't cooperate, and it'll never go according to plan, will it?
No,
the amounts won't, but the efficiency of putting it in one wrapper over another will. And if you understand the advantage of that, and you're maximizing, say, your higher rate tax, or you're making use of a threshold, so you're staying below a certain threshold, which is where you'd be a much higher taxpayer, then obviously that's going to help you quite a lot. So I think there's a few simple tax thresholds and rates that you need to bear in mind, and they will help you accelerate your journey to get to FIRE, as it were, before you get into the retirement.
That brings on to the next question, which was, if you've fully utilized your pension and your ISA, what other options do you have to help you in your FIRE journey?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch here, isn't there? But I mean, generally people get very concerned about taxable accounts, or GIAs as they're called, general investment accounts. I mean, that's my go-to, is just to default into using general investment accounts and don't worry about these more exotic things. But people start looking at venture capital trusts and things like that, and then gold and all sorts of weird things.
Yeah, I think we, as a sort of, our Facebook group would generally agree, I think, that you try and keep it simple and just stick to the three main things, being the pension, the ISA, and if you need one, a general investment account. And that should cover, I think, most eventualities for most people, should it not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The questioner asked a couple of specifics. They said, as well as Aegea, they said, should they be looking at gilts or gold Britannias, etc. And I think we're getting there into asset classes, aren't we, and particular products.
Yes, and I think that gets very complicated very quickly. I mean, I think there's probably a role for gilts. I'm not sure about gold, but these things have their uses, and they have lots of people talking about them on YouTube and stuff. But I think in most cases, sticking to the pension, ISA and GIA should be good enough.
I think the reason that specifically gold Britannia's got a mention there is that they're seen as a tax-free thing. And obviously, if people are looking at tax allowances, that's something to consider. The big one in Aegea is you can get some dividends and then some capital gains each year, with additional allowances in there outside of your ISAs and SIPs. But I don't think I'd be very tempted by any form of gold. I think that's letting tax wag the overall investment return dog here.
Yeah, I do wonder if some of this is during decumulation as well, or the start of decumulation or drawdown, where you might want a little bit of a cash buffer of sorts. So maybe that might be gilts or gold or MMS. Well, I think we come on to that later anyway.
We do, yeah. Yeah, so the next question came from David, and it's quite a common one, which we sort of touched on a few times in the podcast. And he's asking about how to deal with unequal pensions. So his pension is much bigger than his wife's pension. So the question then is, should he be trying to equalize them to make them the same size, or should he be putting more contributions into his one because he saves more tax?
This
Yeah,
is
I think
quite hard to do because you're trying to simultaneously look at the tax on the way in and then the tax on the way out, aren't you?
Yes. I mean, it's a compromise. I mean, I think the first thing I would say is there is obviously some risk in one of you having a much larger pension pot than the other, in terms of if you were to break up or something like that, it could end up with one partner not having a significant fund, but then that would have to be dealt with as part of that. But those things considered, what you generally would aim to do is to try and maximize the tax benefit in the accumulation side, which would generally probably mean the bigger earner making a bigger contribution into their pension.
Yeah, I
So
think
how
that's
would you
almost always the
mitigate that?
case.
Sorry.
So what was the question there? Sorry.
Well, how would you mitigate that? Would you if you've got I'm the higher earner and my partner's a lower earner, everything goes into my pension. That makes sense in terms of tax efficiency as an earner, but it exacerbates this problem. It ends up with a more unequal pension. So do you then say, well, we'll put the lion's share of the bridge fund in my partner's ISA to try and balance things? Or is there a point at which you will take a tax hit on the way in order to make sure, like for instance, do you want to make sure that the lesser earning partner, has enough in their pension that they're going to be able to use up their personal allowance every year in retirement?
I think the first thing I would say, slightly cheeky answer, is the partner with the smaller pension needs to make sure that they're the beneficiary on the partner with the larger pension.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That seems a very small part of it, though. That's just in case one dies.
Yeah, the maths of it generally works out though that you should, the higher rate taxpayer should continue to maximise their higher rate tax, as it were, and only really when they get below the threshold into the basic rate where the other one is, then you start to use the other one. Generally, the maths works out that way, unless, of course, then you start thinking about, well, wait a minute, this person might go over the lump sum allowance, they might have $1 million in their pension when they retire, and therefore that takes away the benefit. Or there might be a higher rate taxpayer, and my spouse might be a basic rate taxpayer in retirement. So then you start to get into that.
Does the gifting of a married person's tax allowance to each other make any impact on this, either accumulating or decumulating?
I mean, it helps a little tiny bit. It's what, 250 quid of extra.
Is that all you can do now?
Well, no, you transfer 1260, I think it is, and then you end up with £252 extra effectively paid to you.
Small fry.
But it only works if the bigger earner is a basic rate taxpayer anyway. So if the other earner is a higher rate taxpayer in retirement, it doesn't work. Yeah. You can't transfer marriage allowance.
I think going back to your point, Andy, if you're getting close to your retirement age and you're starting to build a bridge fund in your ISAs, then there's no real difference between building that bridge fund in one partner's ISA or the other. And it might be tactful or friendly to build the bridge fund in the partner with the smaller pension to make them feel a bit more part of the process.
Similarly, build up their GIA first and up to the point at which you're hitting taxable allowances each year.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of what we've done really. I've got the bigger pension, the DC pension. She had bigger DB pension, as it were. And she's ended up with more of the GIA. I'm not sure that's doing her a favour, but they've ended up with more of the GIA to try and.
Oh, we've lost John.
Oh, okay. Well,
interesting.
We'll go to the next question, and we can get started anyway.
Yeah, so we'll try and limp along without him.
Yeah, Gavin is asking, are bonds an essential part of planning? How can they help smooth returns and reduce your sequence of returns risk?
Oh, we had a hint of John there.
Yeah, we'll wait for John to join.
Yeah, I just disappeared for about 30 seconds there. I don't know why.
So we'll repeat the question for you, John. Gavin was asking about bonds. So can they help to smooth returns, and can they help to reduce the sequence of returns risk? Now, it's a bit of a big subject, so we'll try and give a relatively short answer to this as best we can. In my view, bonds are complicated. There are lots of different types of bonds, and yes, they can be quite useful, but you need to be very careful which ones you're buying and how you buy them, and to know exactly what you're doing.
I think the traditional idea of bonds was that you were obliged to use your entire pension pot to buy an annuity on pension day, and at that point you wanted to get rid of the risk of the portfolio dropping in the run up to that. So it made sense to use bonds for that. Since that is no longer the case in the UK for the past decade or so, I don't see that much use to them, particularly since they seem to suffer from quantitative easing. They're no longer very inflation proof because politicians have cottoned onto them, and they're gaming the bonds market with debt all that they can.
I mean, yeah, the other thing I would say is that if people are worried about equities and they're concerned about volatility and they really want to have some guaranteed income, then the next stage is to look at annuities. They're not going to be as good value as buying the bonds yourself because you're effectively outsourcing buying the bonds to somebody else. But at various points in time and at various points in your age, an annuity can give a reasonable return if you can afford to lose the money.
Yes, I mean, two downsides. The rates are usually poorer when you're younger, and you're giving over the eventual pot. So it's no longer part of your wealth and your inheritors. I think there are better alternatives to bonds. I think the biggest alternative approach is flexing. Flexing your spending down if things go south. And then the second one is carrying a cash buffer into retirement. Because this is basically the first few years of retirement we're looking at with the sequence risk problem, isn't it?
Yes, I think Gavin's point was more also around throughout the whole duration, and I think he's probably referencing the traditional thinking, which used to be that you had your percentage of your age in bonds and that kind of thing. But I think, as you say, that's kind of slightly no longer the case. So I just wait for John to rejoin us. You back, John?
Yeah, I'm on the call. My camera's just given up.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the next question we had was similar question. So looking at the first few years of retirement, should a person make use of a money market fund or gilts to achieve an income ladder, either as a bridge or to provide some income in the first few years of retirement?
He's actually said needed before retirement. Income needed before retirement. I don't quite understand that one.
I think what we're talking about here, and the next question as well from Bex, she's asking perhaps in a more clear way. People suggest having a few years of cash as you retire. How do you do this? Do you use easy access savings accounts? Do you use short dated gilts? Do you use money markets? And is it even worth doing at all? To give my answer, I think generally we would say to people that it's a good idea to have a few years worth of spending in something that's either cash or something very similar to cash that you can get to easily and that's not going to be very volatile.
John, are you with us? Do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, I'm just thinking. I know some IFAs and other places talk about having a ladder, like they have a 10-year ladder. So effectively, they have 10 years of funds in less than effectively 100% equities. So they start off with like 2 or 3 years cash and a couple of years bond, and then 5 years of 80-20 or something, and then the rest is in 100% equity. That sort of ladder they talk about. To my mind, that's mainly about mindset management. So you think you're doing something clever to mitigate sequence of returns risk, and it stops you selling and panicking and that sort of thing. Whereas I think really it doesn't actually matter that much. And it's more about, managing your mindset.
I think that's a good point. There's a lot of psychology involved as well as the actual efficiency of the finance. And I think that's why I often recommend people have a big cash buffer, not necessarily to help the sequence of returns risk, but it just means that they can gradually start selling off the assets, and they've got this cash that they can use. So they're not selling off all their assets at the rate they would do straight away, and they can gradually ease into it.
Yeah, I think if you model this in any of the tool, the back testing tools, then you find that, having a few years cash buffer actually marginally increases your success rate of the 4% rule, but you do need to burn it down. You're not supposed to keep it. So you're meant to actually get rid of it over the first 5 years or so. You're not meant to keep that 5-year cash buffer forever, which people say, I'm just going to replenish it. And you think, no, you shouldn't really be doing that. But
which brings us on nicely to the next question from Gavin, which is, when you're in the accumulation phase, is it beneficial to have a slightly bigger pot to allow a slightly higher withdrawal rate later on? I think what he means by that is, do you have a bigger pot so the withdrawal rate's the same, but you get a bit more money?
I mean, effectively, that's working one more year, isn't it? So you work one more year, you consolidate your position quite strongly, and it becomes a lot, if you've got a less than 4% withdrawal rate, you start to feel a bit more confident about it. You don't worry so much. So, yeah, I mean, there's that side of it, but you've just worked one more year. That's the downside of it.
Yeah, I think it's very tempting, isn't it, when you get to that point that you think, well, I can retire today on this much withdrawal rate, but if I only worked another 18 months, I can get the withdrawal rate much down. And the danger with that is that you never end up retiring.
10 years down the line, yeah.
My thought on this and the previous question is that they're both looking at a pure retirement. What if you're doing a coasting approach? That answers the cash buffer problem, because you're taking the pressure off your portfolio by earning a little and dabbling at something. And similarly, if you rather than working one more year with a higher target of pot, if you were to do a bit of coasting for a while, you could then give your portfolio some room to grow, and so you're likely to outperform that way.
I think that's a very good point, and I think some careers and some jobs lend themselves quite nicely to a coasting approach, where you take your foot off the gas and you can go to a much less stressful role, or part-time, or even that kind of thing. But I think it depends a lot on people's psychology, and also it depends a lot on what kind of career and what kind of business they're in as to whether that's available. But it can be a nice solution. And then the next question, sorry.
Okay. I was going to say, I think the maths of this are quite compelling, actually, when you look at it. If you work one more year, it just takes a huge amount of pressure off. So, I mean, I can understand where it's coming from. I think people like James Shack have done videos on this. What happens if you work one more year and what it does, and it makes a huge difference to your sequence risk. So I can understand where it's coming from, but one more year.
But at some point, you've got to make the leap of faith and actually decide to at least stop the full-time job, or maybe stop working altogether. Andy?
I'd characterize the coasting approach as maybe you do 5 more years of 1 day a week or at something. And so it can be lower earning, more fun, less pressure. And it tackles that initial cliff edge of retirement and struggling for purpose. It gives you something to do with the days, and whilst appreciating the extra time off. So maybe it's the smoother transition.
Yeah, I think that works well for some people. Yeah, we've had a couple on our podcast, haven't we, who've done that to varying degrees. Okay, next question again from Gavin. Quite a big one. How do people set up their drawdown? Do they spend from their SIPP? Do they make use of their general investment account? Or do they use their ISA? And I guess this is quite a big one, but we can give some sort of pointers to general principles here, can't we? I think one of the principles would be, which we discussed earlier, which is quite a good one, is that you would try and make use of your tax allowances, and in particular your personal allowance of currently £12,500. So you try and draw that down from a taxable account in your pension and then look at topping it up from other sources?
I think the bedrock of this is definitely in tax allowances, and it's the mirror of what you do in accumulation. So in accumulation, you're trying to save into all of your tax allowances and use them up. In retirement, equally, you want to use all of your allowances. So the biggies I can see, I want to be using my personal allowance to pull from my SIP in a tax-free way, and I want to, being as I've got a GIA, I want to be using my capital gains allowance and getting everything that I can out of that. So if you go with a strategy of using these different pots up to their tax-free allowances each year, that's a great starting point before you incur any tax.
Yeah, I think using the pension one's the biggie, I think, because you're saving effectively. If you're taking your £12,500 of taxable pension out tax-free, you're saving £2,500 of future tax effectively, because eventually you get taxed on that money at basic rate when you come to take it out. So that's £2,500 you just saved of tax. So that's probably your first one. And then you've got, like say, your GIA is the second. Just take as much as you need out of that, I guess, staying within basic rate, just to use that up and get that into your ISA as fast as you possibly can, if you can, depending on how big it is. And then it's sort of starting to look at more smaller things from then on in terms of tax.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think if you've got a general investment account, you want to both run it down as fast as you reasonably can without paying too much tax, but also to move the assets in the general investment account across into your ISA as quickly as you reasonably can.
Yep.
For me, the ISA is the ultimate pot. I know we want the tax break of using a pension, but ultimately, if I can get all of my wealth into an ISA, then that's the ideal, because then I'm pretty much protected from everything with that money, aren't I?
Yeah. And Gavin's next. Oh, sorry.
So it's nice to do, but I think once you get a GIA of above about 150k or something, it's really difficult to actually get rid of it. So, but yeah. Try and get rid
but I'm thinking in terms of shunting the tax-free money in your pension across.
Yeah.
Whilst ever you've got ISA allowance available, I want to use it up, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Gavin's next point, which is on a similar theme a bit later, how does getting the state pension impact that income plan?
I think it depends when you're retiring and how far off that state pension is, how looming it is in terms of your providing the funding for your lifestyle.
So I think going back to our previous point, with the current figures, then the state pension is more or less exactly the same as the personal allowance. So as soon as your state pension arrives, presuming you take it, you lose that whole personal allowance benefit from taking that from your pension. So you might want to rejig things and then look again at perhaps switching to the ISA and running down your ISA.
I think it's something like half of most people spending the state pension, isn't it, for ordinary people? So possibly more in a lot of cases. And so I think it really is the cavalry riding to the rescue. And I often frame retirement planning in terms of bridging to that state pension arriving. And looking at that, you only need a relatively short-term fund and then a little bit to be topping up that state pension later on.
And as we often say on the podcast, if you're living with a partner and you get 2 state pensions, it's more than twice as good, because you generally don't need twice as much to live on, and that's quite a big income that arrives at that time. And I guess Gavin's next point, which is quite a good one, which is just a reminder about topping up national insurance contributions if you're close to getting a full state pension, but you're missing a few years. And I think, depending on the maths, but generally speaking, the maths involved is quite positive about that, and it's usually worth buying a few more years. I think from examples we've discussed in the group, if you've worked abroad or moved into the UK and have a very, very small number of contributing years, then it's a bit debatable about whether it's worth putting a lot of years in, particularly if you're a long way away from state pension. But I think if you're near retirement or near state pension access age and you've got a couple of years to top up, it's nearly always worth doing that.
Yeah, I've not done the maths, but I think it's almost always, like say, it's almost always going to be beneficial to take that. I mean, it costs you something like £900 ish to buy a year's worth of national insurance contributions if you missed a full year. And I think if you're self-employed, there's even lower. You can actually get it for a much lower number. If you one of the different NI contribution levels allows you to top up state pension. I think it's like 300 quid with NI 2 or something. I can't remember what it is, but there's different ways of doing that.
Yes. Now, if you're self-employed, as you say, it's even cheaper. So there's even more incentive for self-employed people to look at their national insurance record, and they can buy back missing years even more cheaply than other people can. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you've got partial years to fill up, it's a no-brainer. But if you're looking at buying a complete year, then you should think about the runtime to state pension. And you kind of want to be doing this as the last thing before your state pension arrives to fill up your record. Because, of course, if you spend that money on a state pension top-up now, that money isn't compounding. It's a generous system, but it's equally generous whenever you buy it, I think.
Yeah. Well, yes, and I think there's also the bigger risk that you might buy a lot of missing years now, and then if you're 20 years away from your state pension, by the time you get there, they may have introduced means testing, and you don't get the full state pension after all.
Or the goalposts move and there are more qualifying years required, or something like that. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so leaving it too late might leave you exposed to changing the number of qualifying years, and you can't then buy enough a full state pension.
Yeah. So next question moves us on away from the finances a bit more to the fun stuff. And Pierre is asking about whether anyone has looked at options like house or pet sitting or house swapping as a way to make your early retirement portfolio go further and to allow you to explore the world a bit and live abroad.
This is kind of similar to the flexing and coasting ideas, in that this is looking at ways to reduce your living costs in those early years of retirement, isn't it? So
yes.
Geo arbitrage with foreign travel and reducing your housing costs. But then could you house swap or house sit and actually eliminate your need for a home and the embedded costs of that? Probably not.
No, probably not.
I think probably not, but there probably are YouTubers who claim to do it.
But effectively getting free accommodation in a foreign country, potentially, if you can house swap with the right people. I know it's something my mum used to do. She was in something called Friendship Force. So effectively you swapped houses with people around the world. You joined effectively as an worldwide organisation, and you swapped houses for a couple of weeks a year or something.
Yes, I think it works for slow travel more than as a way to ditch your house.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I mean, Pierre also says, how does this work as part of a way to leverage the FAR lifestyle to have amazing travel experiences? And I think slow travel covers it well, Andy. I've got friends who live in the US and who are in a pet sitting group and manage to get amazingly high quality accommodation in London and around the world doing pet sitting. But I think to get to that point, you have to have a reputation and to have built up a number of positive feedback recommendations and that kind of thing. But it can be a very efficient way of seeing the world, particularly if you've got a smaller house at home.
I also think you should think about what this will actually entail and what it will deliver you, because it's all right saying, hey, great, I'm going to go off around the world doing this. But if the reality is, right, I've got a pet sit in a house in New Plymouth in New Zealand for 4 weeks, that's lovely, but it gives you 4 weeks in New Plymouth, which is a very nice town, but you're not then seeing all the other stuff. It's on top of this, you're going to have the normal costs of traveling and seeing the rest of a country, aren't you?
Yes, it's just the accommodation cost, and I think sometimes some of the pets are quite high maintenance and do require feeding at certain times of the day, which kind of can limit your options a bit if you've got to be there, 6:30 in the morning to feed Tiddles every day.
Am I right in thinking it is pretty limited in locations as well? If you're going to find a pet sit in New Plymouth, are these scarce enough that you're not going to find one that's the next hop along in your journey?
I don't know. I think the friend I know does it in the US quite a lot, where I think it's more common. But I think they do it in the UK a bit as well, and I think there's a surprisingly large number. I also have a friend who's on the other side of this, who has cats and has a pet sitter come in and they generally only have one person who looks after their cats. But they're quite happy with it as well, because there's a security angle and obviously looking after the animals, and it's a lot cheaper than a cattery or a kennel. Okay.
Next question.
So the next questions, couple of questions from John, actually, again, more around the general fire community. There's a question about ISA millionaires and whether we expect to see ISA millionaires becoming fire, and more of them in the future. And also about what percentage of people follow the fire path, and how does this sit in the wider financial landscape?
Yeah,
I can answer the ISA millionaires bit. The specific question I saw was, why aren't all these you fired people ISA millionaires? And to me, because that's the way the media do frame these things, and they look at simple things like, how much have you got in your ISA? Most of us are having our SIP do the heavy lifting, so the ISA is very much the poorer sibling.
Is this just the media ignorance of how pensions work?
Well, yes, it's too complicated to explain, probably. So I imagine we have a lot more SIP millionaires than ISA millionaires.
Absolutely.
But within that, why are we assuming that people need to be millionaires when for a relative, well, a typical ordinary person, if they're looking at a 4% drawdown, we're talking, if someone's replacing spending of 20,000 a year, that's a £500,000 pot. So we're not into the millions now. And as we're starting, if we're prioritizing these early retirement healthy years and saying, I want to prioritize time over money, we're never going to build up into being millionaires, because we're going to be drawing down those pots and eating the growth, aren't we?
Yeah,
that's a very good point. Yes, I think maybe a lot of this is confused, I think, also by couples. So to use your example, in a lot of cases, we know from our group and our podcasts and interviews that, and also the question we had at the start, people's incomes and retirement pots tend to be very unequal. And if you're a couple retiring and you want a £40,000 income between you, then you are going to need £1 million. But generally speaking, that'll be quite often much heavily weighted towards one partner than the other. So I guess that also kind of leans towards the millionaire thing. I think the more interesting question for me is how many people are actually following early retirement, and how many people have even heard of it or even considered it.
Yeah, it's something I've been trying to get my head around, and I can't really get the numbers. Whenever I try and pin it down, it seems to come out quite small. Yet the number of people who follow fire groups are incredibly large. So if you look at like the Reddit fire group, there's like 300,000 or something stupid on there. You think, well, it can't be 300,000. Yeah, the Reddit Fire UK subreddit, whatever you want to call it. I think there was like 300,000 last time I looked. I'm thinking, wow, they can't all be following fire, surely. But maybe they're just all fire adjacent, as it were, and just a bit interested in retiring. I don't know. There's probably a lot of bots as well.
Is there maybe a kind of reality gap between those who subscribe to the groups and occasionally read them, but don't really take it that seriously?
I suspect so.
I think so as well. I think we see a lot of non-participants on these things. But even so, 300,000, that's what, less than 1% of the working age population of the country.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I guess we're doing our best to spread the word, but you can lead a horse to water, you can't make it drink. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the people we capture are the ones that are further along the path anyway, that are looking to optimize and a bit of reassurance that they're going about this the right way.
Yes, there's an interesting question about how people find out about it. And we know from our group that a lot of people join our group either through friends who've been through an event or something that's kind of triggered an interest in their finances, and then they sort of realize that, oh yes, maybe I can retire early, or maybe I have to retire early, or that kind of thing. Quite often it's not really an organic kind of educational thing. It seems to be something that spurs someone's interest.
Well, we've rattled through quite a lot of questions. We've done all 14 there, haven't we?
I think we have, yes, we've done well.
Great. Well, I'm sure we'll come back and do this again when we get the next batch of questions after a few months, but that's useful. Sometimes we get wrapped up in quite detailed things, and some of these have been basic concepts, haven't they? And it's good to sort of loop back and do the basics.
Yes, I mean, we've got the wiki, which covers a lot of these issues, and there's a bit more detail there. And we've got the Facebook group where people often discuss this in a lot more detail. But it is good to go and revisit some of these basic questions. And we keep coming back to the simple questions about the difference between accumulation and drawdown, and how to use different accounts, and how to use tax, and how to protect yourself against sequence of returns risk and those kind of things. And I think we will always circle back on those.
Right then, let's wrap this up. Thanks for participating, guys. Much appreciated. Listeners, thank you for listening. If you enjoy the podcast, please subscribe and give this episode a like. It helps us to play the algorithm and get them showing us to more people. You can find details on the topics we've discussed here on our wiki, which is thefireplace.info. And we also appreciate feedback and comments onto our Facebook group, which is the Fireplace UK, which you can find via a link on our wiki website. And finally, if you'd like to support this project, you can make a donation. We've got a nice link on the website for Buy Me a Coffee, and the details of that are also on the podcast description as well as the wiki website. Thanks very much, guys. See you soon.
Thanks, Andy.
Bye.
Thanks.